Well, hi there, everyone. This is Dr. Schroeder with this week's video introduction to week number 7 of our course in healthcare research. And this week we've been tackling this this article about the Taiwanese hemodialysis patients, and looking at it as a phenomenological study. And a phenomenological study is one of the more broad classes of qualitative studies, where essentially it's a study to examine what is the phenomenon, what are the values, attitudes, and beliefs about a particular population or about a particular group of subjects based on their own individual feelings, their own, whatever their particular values or whatever their particular impressions are. And so, as you could tell, reading through this qualitative study, as is common with almost all qualitative studies, they really read quite a bit differently than a quantitative study. A quantitative study is very structured. I sometimes use the analogy that reading a quantitative study is about as exciting sometimes as reading a washer and dryer repair manual. I mean, it's basically a list of instructions, how something was done, and a lot of statistical talk, and a lot of statistical jargon with a lot of numbers that, unless you really know what the statistics mean, are in and of themselves fairly meaningless, unless you know how to apply the statistical principles, and unless you know how to interpret what some of those numbers mean. But in a qualitative study, it reads much more like a story, oftentimes like a short story. Another analogy that I use as a qualitative study is kind of like a documentary. If you ever watch a documentary where there's kind of like a general question, we're going to do a documentary on tribes of Native Americans, and we're going to go live with them for a while and find out what it's like living on the reservations and finding out what their lived life is like, and then doing this little video documentary. And in many ways, that's really what a qualitative study is all about. But a qualitative study, therefore, has a different way of figuring out who the population is going to be. Always in a qualitative study, you want to have a purposive, or you always want to select your study not based on randomness, but on the study subjects meeting certain criteria that are consistent with whatever the thing that you're actually looking at. There's no sense doing a random selection of the population if really you're just looking for a segment of that population that has a particular experience. For example, maybe you're going to do a qualitative study of how nursing students feel about nursing school. Well, you're not going to do a random sample of students, random sample of students across the campus. You're going to focus in on just get nursing students, and focus in on just get nursing students that express a willingness to want to talk about that. And so that's very much what qualitative is really all about, is finding subjects that are willing to talk, that have a story to share, and that will help to add clarity and help to lead to this thing called data saturation. Data saturation is just that point at which you've really gotten about as much information as you can, that if you talk to another 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 people, you're not going to be coming up with any new significant themes. And so this we're going to be shifting in to week 7. We're going to talk about this research process and this concept of identifying themes. And so that's really going to be the heart of the research question. Once again, taking this same nursing study and then looking to see how well the researchers describe their methodology. And we'll describe how describing methodology is different in a qualitative study than it is in a quantitative. I do want to wrap up one thing, since I had gone through and had graded all the critiques earlier. One point that was missed by a couple of you, and so I wanted to kind of cover it, and it actually makes sense to do it now, is the question of confidence. Confidence and significance. Some of you stumbled on that. Most of you were able to, understand what the question was asking. But a few of you had talked about significance and confidence more in terms of how confident you felt just subjectively about was it a good study or not. That's not really what confidence significant refers to, though, in a statistical sense. When we talk about statistical significance, It's an important aspect because when you go through and again, I'm shifting back to a quantitative study now. In a quantitative study, you want to have, as a general rule, as many participants as possible. You want to get as many people into that N number, as we say. The N is a statistical number that just means the number of subjects or the number of data points in a population. You want to get as many as possible because the more you have, the higher your confidence level. Confidence is a statistical principle. It's not a subjective one. So when a researcher identifies a confidence level, it's usually indicated as a p-value, or there's the p, or I should say the p level. The p level is usually set somewhere between 0.05 and 0.001. That is somewhere between a 95%, 0.5 would be 95%, it's really just a reflection of a percentage, or down to 0.001, which is 99.9% percentage. And that number is then compared against a number called the p-value. The p-value is a statistical formula that I won't go into great detail, but it's essentially your number of participants minus what's called the degrees of freedom. And the degrees of freedom is just one, there's a calculation that goes on with that then determines what that number is going to be. And then when you analyze the data, if your p-value is actually greater than that 0.005 number, that means that you have met the criteria and that you can say that your confidence is at least 95%. If your confidence level beats the 0.001 number, then that means that your data is 99.9%. An analogy would be, let's say that I'm just doing a very simple random coin toss. It's really just a reflection of probability. How many times is it going to come up heads? How many times is it going to come up tails? If I'm doing a random trial, I do it 10 times, and 5 times it comes up head, 5 times it comes up tails. Statistically, I can analyze and see that that's exactly what it should come up, that that's exactly the number that it should be. However, if I happen to do 10 coin flips and 9 times out of 10 it comes up heads, only once it comes up tails, I'm into that closer to a well over 95% probability that that's not going to happen. And so if I have a p-value that statistically shows that I'm not within that 95% range, that means that this is probably an outlier. It's not really representative of what the normal probability would really be. So I just wanted to kind of back up a little bit and go back and talk about that. When you hear that term confidence and significance, that's what it refers to. Confidence level is the set level that the somewhere between 0.05 and 0.001% that the researcher identifies as they're going to set as their confidence level. And then the p-value is the statistical analysis that actually shows what the significance was. So I just wanted to kind of, again, that's more of a statistical principle, and I don't think we're going to be going back and doing any more statistics, but I wanted to cover that because a few of you had missed that concept, and I just want to go back and cover that. Otherwise, well done. Your qualitative studies, or excuse me, your qualitative critiques are due this week, and again, they'll be due on Sunday. Same principle, I gave you each feedback on your quantitative, so you should have a pretty good idea the scope and depth that I'm looking at. You will complete those, you will submit those, and then I will go ahead and get those graded next week. And then you got a final exam next week for 2 weeks worth of discussion and one final exam and finishing up those qualitative critiques, and then you're on to your next class. So I wish you all a great rest of the weekend if you're watching this on your President's Day weekend. Otherwise, I look forward to participating with you in class, and we'll see you in the discussion forums.